actually start this episode off a little bit differently. And although what I'm about to say has literally nothing to do with photography, it's my podcast. I guess I can kind of do this. That's kind of the fun part of being your own boss. In my lifetime, there's only been 2 celebrity deaths that have genuinely affected me, genuinely bothered me.
Yeah.
The first being Kris Cornell a few years back. And this week we lost my absolute favorite comedian, someone whose jokes I have stolen to such a ridiculous extent that I actually have a file in my notes in my phone of adapted versions of his jokes I can use at weddings as kind of a way of entertaining people while I'm trying to get the job done. Norm Macdonald passed away, and after I think it was a 9-year battle, a secret battle with cancer. And I just want to say that was genuinely one of the saddest things that's happened in a long time. With everything else that's going on, to say that was really that sad is kind of incredible. But he's a tremendous loss, and I'm going to miss him greatly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, same here. And it's interesting because I think I was talking about my brother, my dad, my grandfather. So you have 3 generations. You know, my grandpa grew up listening to radio in the 40s, like Jack Benny and everything. Then my dad, 80s, 90s SNL. So, but all 3 of us absolutely we're watching the compilation of his weekly was a weekend update. Just when he would talk about the OJ trial. And gosh, absolutely just his delivery.
Well, that was one of the things. He committed to something, and no matter how awkward it got, he stuck with it. And that's what made him so fantastic. I'd also recommend for anyone that's interested in checking him out and seeing the genius that he was, there's a YouTube channel called I'm Not Norm, which has fantastic compilations of all of his stuff. So anyway, I need to steer this quickly back towards photography, or I'm going to go completely off on one. Okay, so now that we've discussed the non-photographic stuff, let's start with the photographic stuff. I've been on a wonderful sort of pilgrimage through the world of YouTube over the last maybe 6 to 8 weeks, and I found some fantastic, I hate the word content creators because it sounds biblical, but some fantastic people that create photographic videos and so on. I have a love-hate relationship with the photographic side of YouTube. I tend to go through stages of not wanting to watch any of it because YouTube keeps pushing out the same people. And then you start to find these hidden gems one after the other. And at the moment, I'm riding the crest of that wave. And one of those amazing channels that I have recently found is Expired Bren. And before we start talking about expired film and film photography and photographing in sort of the West Coast, Midwest, whatever of America, let's just start off with how you first found photography. So what made you want to start photography in the first place?
It's a good question. I think it started off just growing up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I really, really liked, just the surrounding landscape and nature, and just starting off with a simple iPhone, this was high school. I felt the need to maybe try and up my game more just from simple iPhone photos. And I got a Canon T6 Rebel. So that's an entry-level digital camera. And from there, I actually made the jump straight into film. So really not much of a digital background going into my photography.
Well, let's stop right there. So you jumped straight into film. Why the immediate jump into film?
Well, so I had my Canon Rebel, and for what I would do, and I was really happy with the photos I was taking. And then I actually was getting my master's in Berlin, and a couple of my friends, I was with them, and they both had Voigtlander Vito, like those little rangefinders, and it just absolutely just drew me in, this whole process they had there of shooting these images on film. And pretty much I got the same little Voigtlander rangefinder as them. And from there, it was pretty much off to the races. But just pure fascination, I guess, with the medium is what got me started, seeing someone using it in person.
Well, it's interesting. One thing that really stands out with yourself is you have a similar issue to what I have, and I'm currently trying to fix the issue. I think you might be going further down the rabbit hole, which is just the acquiring of many cameras. I'm currently in the process of slimming down what I have. I'm going to be getting rid of my peel apart Polaroid cameras pretty soon, and I've actually shifted a couple of other Polaroids and whatnot. It's very tempting, especially with the price that a lot of film cameras sit around and the interesting features that are around for you to pick up lots of different types of cameras. You have a collection that appears to be significantly bigger than one that I've really ever come across. So how big is your current camera collection, and what are your current favorites?
Oh man, my questions. I think my collection. Oh gosh, I'd say 30 odd cameras, give or take. A lot of them I have sold recently as well, because it is a lot, and I feel bad if I don't use them, And right now, my favorites would probably be. My favorite be still the Mamiya RB67. For a lot of people, they seem to get that camera as their entry into the 6x7 format, and then they move on to like a Pentax 6.7. But I've been really, the past 2.5 years I've owned it, I've been really happy with that camera. So that's my all-time favorite. And then also I have a Rolleiflex 3.5A. So it's like an early 50s model. And it's significantly cheaper than, the 2.8 models. I think what they come in tests are, and what would be the other model. Anyhow, those two are my favorites for a long time. So even with all the cameras I've been getting, I still kind of have my two all-time favorites at the top of the list, if that makes sense.
So for people that don't understand, or perhaps are used to working with one camera, or perhaps just hate the idea of having different things to learn on that scale.
Yeah.
What do you get different from each of those cameras? So let's say you start off with your Mamiya. What isn't your Mamiya doing for you that means that you need another 120 camera?
Good question. I think you'd hear this quite a bit, is just how portable it is. It's a hefty camera. I don't think there's many 6x7 cameras under like $2,000 that would be outside of that heavy category or hefty category. So, and a lot of people don't like 6x6, and I personally really love shooting 6x6. And there's, an infinite amount of 6x6 medium format cameras that are going to be either, under 2 kilos, or that you can even fit in your pocket. So I think the big factor is just size, if you're traveling or if you're hiking. Convenience. Yeah.
Well, I really, 100%. I mean, something from an outside perspective, and I'm very, very new to film and very inexperienced and very clueless when it comes to film. But from an outside perspective, something that stands out is that the two main factors that go into, like, if you have to grab a camera and you don't have enough money to buy 30.
Yeah.
One would be, obviously, that the lens matches the genre and style of photography that you're into, which I think is, for example, the Pentax 6.7 with the Takuma 105 2.4. I think a lot of people buy that camera specifically for that lens. And it's obviously a very good portrait lens. It's fantastic for natural light work and so on. It has such a distinct look for it. I'm trying to find a way to get that lens and adapt it onto my digital cameras so that I can use it for that. And the other side of it is this, like you've already alluded to, 6x7, 6.45, 6x6. I'm someone that really, really, really struggles with 6x6. I find square aspect ratio very hard to compose images of people.
Absolutely.
I think if you're photographing things that are very, very hard lined and sort of geometric, it's a lot easier, maybe just for me. But I think that's a big deciding factor. So with the cameras that you're using, and I guess including 35mm in this as well, is it the case that like the camera, you'll be a different photographer based on the camera that you're holding?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question because I haven't thought about that much. Yeah, if you're shooting with different cameras almost on a constant basis, I think it does impact your shooting style and even your compositions. I find that with the 6x7 format, my compositions are probably a little, I wouldn't say better, but I find my compositions to be more, how would I put this? I guess more sound, either with using, leading lines or anything of that sort, if that makes sense. I think also it comes down to just like a lot of these cameras, they come with fixed focal lengths. like a TLR would. Whereas a Mamiya RV67, obviously you can switch lenses and you can switch backs. I think the modular system is really why I like that camera, because I love being able to switch between black and white and color, because you could be on a hike or whatever, and really just switching between those two, black and white and color, your photography style can change quite a bit, and you really look for different subjects. So in a way, I think that's why I like the RV67, is just because you can switch more so between film stocks, mid-roll. And that would be the one that would really affect my images the most.
Well, something that I definitely feel like I've probably harped on about too much, potentially on the podcast, but for sure when I've run workshops or in conversations with photographers, especially if they're going through a particular, like a creative slump, or they're hitting a bit of a brick wall and they're starting to stagnate a little bit with their work, is just the introduction of chaos. So once you've got your process down and your sound in the way that you work, if you're someone that photographs people, you're very comfortable in the way that you engage with the subject, and your lighting, but at that point you're just kind of reproducing the same work over and over again, and you're hitting a bit of a funk with it. Introducing some chaos within that sort of structure tends to create a new way of thinking, a new end product that can drag you out of that sort of slump that you're going through. And there's lots of different ways to do that. I often, with digital photographers, I talk about lenses. Take what you know about lenses. A lot of the time in the digital world, especially places like YouTube, lenses are always spoken about in a very technical way in terms of distortion, compression, depth of field. I tend to talk to people more in the sense of like context, in a real world sense. So if you're having trouble with your images and all of your images are someone being dragged out of the background by an incredibly narrow depth of field and a long lens, put them somewhere where they have to interact with the context and shoot wider. And it will change your process. The chaos will make you have to think on your feet. I can't really think of a more chaotic way to do things than to introduce film that expired 30 years ago, where you literally couldn't predict the end result if you wanted to. So
yeah,
I mean,
that's true chaos.
This is going to be an entire education for me here. So to start off with, what's the attraction of photographing with expired film?
I think chaos does have a huge factor in it. It does keep me on my feet. And not only that, but sometimes how do I describe this? How does one put this? I guess sometimes I enjoy more so the experience and the end result, just being able to go outside and hike around somewhere and take photos. Sometimes in the end, if the photos turn out or not, it really doesn't make a difference, which that's no way to justify using expired film, but it's one of those things where I'm just happy to be out there and shooting. For me, for shooting expired film nowadays, I've kind of leaned from really, I have a lot lying around, but I think the big thing nowadays is if you buy things in not bulk, but let's say like a pro pack, 5-pack, and then you're able to shoot one roll and you can kind of see what to expect. And once you know that, if you know that, okay, this film here is going to be really, it's going to have a significant color shift. If it's going to have way more significant amount of grain, then really you can use that for special scenarios or situations where you don't necessarily need to rely on the accuracy of color, but rather just the composition of the image. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to really just explain why I enjoy it so much. I think also just comes down to the fact that you're shooting with a lot of film stocks that don't exist anymore. And if you do come across one that's in great condition, then you're going to be having, some sort of, you're going to have results that are going to be almost impossible to replicate.
Well, on that note, something that really stands out to me with film is there seems to be a bit of a contradiction in terms lately with photographers that correct film to like a very, very strong degree. I understand the need to correct the scanning process to get it closer to, what it should look like, I guess, in the sense of what the film stock it does. If you shoot with Ektar and you start undersaturating the reds, you're kind of undoing the point of having Ektar in the first place, for example. Is there too much focus on like correcting or getting everything to look like quote unquote right, as opposed to letting the film stock that you're shooting with have its own character and be wrong in an interesting way?
It's a really good question. In my mind, I think the biggest process for me has been actually not so much. Well, I have made a lot of improvement in terms of composing my images, choosing my subjects, and actually being consistent with getting the correct exposure or something whereabouts. In the end, though, I think when it comes down to scanning and editing, I think that's really that should be emphasized even more. I think at least in Lightroom for my images, I personally don't do a whole lot, but there are quite a few images that I would have figured are underwhelming, and just some minor adjustments really made a huge difference. Not so much to color, but mainly just to what's the word I'm looking for black and white, especially
like a contrast thing, or
the contrast, the color, like the curves,
right?
Yeah. For me, that's something I never really did, because I didn't think it would make much of a difference. But nowadays, for my black and white photography, especially, I make sure to really slow down my process of editing and to try and get the contrast to a point where I personally like it. So I think for black and white, not everyone is on the same page for what they really enjoy in the contrast of an image or the tonality of an image.
Well, we're currently living in an age where people, sorry to get very, very minorly political here. I try my best not to.
Oh, it's all good.
But we're living in an age where people using their slave mind, sweatshop made $1,000 phones tweet or write a story about oppression. So we're kind of living in a very not very self-aware age. So I'm going to do something that's very not self-aware here, which is kind of making me look just as bad. But I've talked before on the podcast about the attention that film photography is getting, and the popularity of it increasing is actually damaging it in a way that sort of cameras are getting bought up, film stocks are getting sort of eviscerated by the demand for certain things depending on what's popular. You know, a YouTuber can bring out a video about a new camera they've got, and instantly the price of those cameras can triple on eBay out of nowhere. And it's sort of very counterintuitive. It kind of makes sense that you want to proliferate something that you enjoy. You want it to become more popular, but at the same time, if the basis of what you enjoy can't be replenished, it's very bad to continually draw attention to it in a kind of ironic way. But with regards to something like expired film, there's obviously, like you just said, some of these don't exist anymore. They haven't been produced in decades. How do you even find expired film, and why would people want to sell it?
That's a good question. For me, it is a very finite source, even compared to a lot of the cameras, I think, because especially if you're looking for 120 film, a lot of the time it's going to be maybe a former professional photographer. He passed away, she passed away, and then their family either sends it to a Goodwill, and someone picks it up, puts it online, or whatever it may be. But eventually that's just not going to happen anymore. And eventually the passage of time is just going to render most of these films completely unusable. Right now, we're still in that period where it's the end of film photography as the major photography. It's still recent enough, but then it comes down to just finding them. I think even in the time that I've been buying them up, really, it's become way more in demand than before. It's harder to find good deals. I mean, I really hardly ever find good deals at this point on film online. So that does come down into just the rise in popularity in these finite sources of films or cameras being more so, what do you say, like just tapped than ever. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I kind of sometimes I drift off a little bit.
No, you're good.
Back in.
I mean, one thing it does sort of make me think is that you could potentially kind of seed the situation by, so for example, obviously Fuji 400H has gone extinct.
Yeah. R.I.P.
I'm a lot of people that didn't ever shoot with it were very upset, and made sure to post about it a lot, so that what was left of it got sold out much quicker. So the people that did use it ended up getting ripped off, which was quite annoying.
Yeah.
I have a couple of boxes of 120 400H. I'm probably going to add a couple of boxes before the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So on the subject of kind of seeding the situation, can you, or do you, buy film and then, for want of a better term, just kind of let it rot and expire so that you have some expired film? Is that something that you would do, or you do, you know, to kind of keep the supply there?
Yeah. But for the most part, I wouldn't say that I do keep film around long enough for, if it were fresh, like quote unquote fresh when I bought it, that it would be expired. Some of them just expire a lot quicker than others, though, like Cinestill and it just like anything motion picture film related. I think they tend to have short periods of being fresh, quote unquote fresh. Mm-hmm. But no, I haven't kept anything around long enough before they enter that expired phase. And I think, you know, if they're stored under the right condition, they're a couple of years bad, then you're really not going to have to sweat it at all. The few amounts of film that are within a decade old that I've shot, a decade with a expiration I've had zero issues with.
Right.
So it's almost pointless to shoot barely expired film unless just because there's just no difference. I think so. It's not pointless, but it's pointless to consider it as expired film, I should say.
Right. So for people that haven't shot, like myself, I don't think I've shot expired film, or if I had, well, I suppose I've shot expired peel apart Polaroids, but
yeah,
ignoring my complete lack of success with peel apart Polaroids. For the people that don't know, what are the positives and negatives, no pun intended, of photographing with expired film?
I'd say a big positive is if you're patient and you're working hard enough, you can get some pretty good deals. You could at least save 50%, if not, like, you know, let's say Portra right now. If you buy a Portra excluding development, you're paying at least $10 a roll, and that alone would be probably a good deal for most folks.
Right.
But if you can manage to be patient and find a good enough deal, then you're talking only a couple bucks a roll of some of these expired films. And I think for a lot of folks, that's just sort of risk that's almost worth it in the end, because that is such a huge amount of savings that you get there. All the better if you can develop film on your own, because, you know, that's just another way of cutting out any potential costs to what is already an expensive hobby.
But in terms of usage,
yeah, the costs,
I just feel like in terms of usage, there's plenty of positives to using film, and there's plenty of negatives. You know, obviously, cost per shot compared to digital is much higher. I've seen people try and finagle these things by saying, well, a digital camera costs more. It's like, yeah, but that's a one-off cost, and it's hard to argue that a digital camera costs more when, you know, like already mentioned, an RB67 in England at the moment is about $2,000.
Dang.
Yeah, so it's not, and bear in mind that's pounds, so the conversion doesn't make that good at all.
Yeah.
There's plenty of positive reasons in terms of the end product. There's plenty of negative reasons, one being potentially the cost. But with expired film, with what you get as the end result, or within the use of it, like the actual, when you're out and about shooting with it, what are the positives and negatives?
That's a good question. Positives would certainly be that you're going to have unique results. I think it's important, I should stress this, is I think it is to try and buy things and kind of like be more organized when you shoot expired film. That is, if you, for the most part, let's say you buy like 10 rolls of gold 200 off of eBay. Well, more than likely, not certain, but likely, all these rolls will be in have a similar amount of degradation and just storage conditions. So if you can, you know, have a way of knowing, all right, I shot a roll from this batch of 10 rolls, and that roll came out, you know, maybe I wouldn't say, you know, the goal isn't to have it look identical to a fresh roll of gold. But let's just say it came out satisfactory. Then you're going to know for sure, all right, I got 9 more rolls of this stuff left. And I'll have some expectation of the results. And that doesn't really impact, I guess, what you're asking though. the positive of shooting with it? That is a tough question. I think it just comes down to just results being different than what you might see from other folks shooting portrait, straight portrait. I guess that's my way of just not trying to get into this rut of shooting the same, portrait 400 over and over again also.
Well, that's 100% the problem I see a lot with obviously doing a podcast. I'm exposed to talking to a lot of photographers from different backgrounds, different genres, shooting in different mediums and so on. And something that I do encounter an awful lot, especially with people whose, it's kind of a strange one. It reminds me, I remember my auntie worked at a school and they asked for, I'm trying to get this right. They asked her for, they used to ask what your race was. And one of the students wrote Jewish. And at the time, this is going back quite a distance, like Jewish, that's a religion, it's not a race. And it caused a bit of confusion. And I feel like there's a similar thing with photographers that are film photographers. Like, I don't think of myself as a digital photographer or a film photographer. I think of myself as a wedding and portrait photographer because that's the subjects that I shoot. And I think people that define themselves by being a film photographer tend to fall into that category that you're kind of talking about there, where they shoot, portrait 400, which I have to say, portrait 400 is the absolute most idiot-proof film going. Like, you really can't get it that wrong.
There's a reason why it's popular, and yeah. I personally love it, but it's hard to come by pretty nowadays, and it's just only getting more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, the pricing side of things is getting a little bit ridiculous. But for people that haven't shot film, everyone has a different reason for going to that medium. Some people I've spoken to have said that it kind of irks back to, like, it's a nostalgic feeling. It slows them down. They like the older cameras more. They don't like the look of digital. For me personally, I can't stand the trend of retouching that's going on with digital people photography. Like, we're alienating like what an image is from what we're seeing to such a degree that I don't find it enjoyable to look through a lot of modern portrait photographers or wedding photographers' work because it's so manipulated to a point of not being realistic. Whereas film kind of sticks a knife in the ground and says, like, we're going to be honest about this and this is what things look like. And we're almost at a point now where showing someone the way they actually look is markedly improved because of how bad retouching has become. And retouching, I feel, is a bit like alcohol. You really shouldn't do it on your own, or you probably have a problem with it. With regards to like photography, so if we take the film side of things out of it, what do you enjoy about photography?
What I enjoy about photography as a viewer or as a person who takes photos? As a photographer. As a photographer, for me, I think it is just the ability to convey the emotions of a scene. And maybe someone doesn't have to have the same emotions as you when they see the image, but to just have that kind of just have a way to express yourself. And it's not only that, but I've heard it was a quote from somebody, but basically, photography does what words can't do, I guess. Right. If that makes sense. It's a way of expressing myself without words. And I think a lot of people feel that way, because for me, it's a question that would always be very tough for me to answer. But for me, it's just the ultimate way of expressing myself. I feel very comfortable with the images that I take and being able to show them to people. Do you feel like with film, one thing I've noticed, yourself included in this, and the desire, if I didn't live in a hellhole like Hampshire in England, I probably would be doing the same thing. I'd be very much anxious to do the same thing. There's a lot of desire to associate film photography with older architecture, older cars, the nostalgia side of film photography, that you photograph subjects that were abundant back when film was much more popular. It does seem to be very much focused around a particular geographic area and a particular period of time. Do you think that we're kind of missing an opportunity by not photographing the modern world as much in film, because that could serve the longevity of film much better? That's a very good question. And I think it also is something that I've thought about, is just, if I look back at the photos I've taken, 10, 20 years from now, what am I going to think of them? I think that's the reason why it's such a popular subject, this Americana or classic cars, is that when you look at some of the more famous photographers of the mid to late 20th century, that's the subject of the images. And a lot of people enjoy these images for that reason. If that makes sense. It's just a matter of, I guess, if you're taking photos of more contemporary subjects, in my mind, I would think this image would be something that would want to be still interesting in the present and interesting 20 years from now. Yeah, and I think there is definitely a way that people could use film photography with contemporary subjects. For me, I think, for example, and it's something I haven't touched on or with my photography, is just this ongoing Corona. Someday, I think a lot of the images people could be taking or are taking would be all the more interesting 20 years from now when you look back at this whole period of time.
Well, I definitely think that people are going to be missing a trick if they're not photographing things in a non-manipulated way now, because distrust of the media has never been higher. People's distrust of pretty much any opinion that's not their own seems to be higher than ever. And the fact that everyone's walking around with a digital camera in their pocket, and, people think that sort of editing something is down to like put it in your computer and start playing with sliders or start rubbing stuff out or start pasting stuff in. Editing can come down right at the point of shooting where you're deciding what to and not to frame, what to leave out of a scene and what to include. That's a significant part of the editing process. And I feel like film, there is so much more subconscious integrity to it. I think people naturally accept film photography as being much more honest because of the nature of it. The fact that it's tangible, there's a physical thing that you can show people. That's like, that's what was there when I photographed it. That's maybe at a time like this is much more useful than it's being given credit for. I'd like to see more people. I think during the Black Lives Matter uprising last year, we saw a lot of people photographing with film. We see people when there's natural disasters photographing with film.
Yeah, that's been a big thing of mine lately. So I kind of live in what I would argue is, well, a lot of people are calling it in this area like the front row to the apocalypse, but pretty much is the epicenter of just the ongoing climate crisis, so to speak.
And just as a way to kind of photograph that in a I guess it's non-negotiable. Like, that's what was there. That's what I photographed. It's not like, when I look at something, when I, look at all movies now, look at all media that's being put out, it's all green screen shit that like, I don't believe people are, I don't really like people, but I don't believe people are as stupid as what I think a lot of Hollywood would have them believe they are when it comes to how obvious things are green screened, how badly edited things are now, how cartoonish a lot of things look. That I feel like by doing something like photographing with film in this day and age, you're going to stand out more. And that integrity is going to be maybe not consciously observed, but it's going to sit with people that it's more of a realistic product or end product, not product in terms of capitalism, but end product as in what you produce, purely because people are aware that film is a lot harder to manipulate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've never really drawn this connection between film and manipulation of images, especially in mass media and social media, especially. But it is all really good points that you bring up. If I were to just add anything to it, I think it is also important just through this process is learning how much in the past was manipulated through darkroom processes. And, trying to think what the process is called, but where you essentially use paint on a lot of these prints, especially if you look at photos of from the golden age of Hollywood. You'll see a lot of the portraits of a lot of these actors, actresses, their skin is just as smooth as silk. You know what I mean? It's just, so so it's something that almost, I wouldn't say, I don't think it's like anything contrary to what you think, but just kind of an awareness of just in the past, how easy it was to manipulate as well in both photography as a form of of a mass media product, and also in like news and journalism as a just if you look at some of the most famous images of the 20th century. I study history. So a lot of these images you see over and over again, but a lot of them are, indeed manipulated.
So speaking of mass media, the way I found you was through YouTube, and YouTube has become this absolute behemoth of entertainment. It's really funny now watching, I don't know I guess it would be network TV. I don't know what the Americanism is for it, but I would say terrestrial TV, where they talk about something that's been seen on YouTube. And it's like having a husband complimenting his wife's new lover. It's like a really bizarre situation where TV's almost pointing out that most people aren't watching TV, they're watching YouTube. YouTube's become so huge, streaming services have become so huge and so on. It's great because it democratizes it, and it means that people like me in Hampshire in England can find people like you all the way over there in America. So why did you want to start YouTube in the first place?
I think for me, it came out of the deep depths of the first lockdown the last year. I was everyone was obviously not in the best of mood. And for me, I thought, okay, I have all this expired film that I've been shooting. So pretty much also, I wouldn't say I'm not very savvy for anything videography related or anything involving editing videos. But I think in a way, it's a nice guide for people who might be finding the same film stock to just see what they could expect with their results, worst or best case scenario, or somewhere in the middle. Because I think I found myself quite often, if I'm buying a new camera, a new lens, a new film stock, I'm going to spend a good amount of time looking up online just the results people are getting. So this is just another option for people who might come across an old roll of Kodak Gold or an old roll of Ektachrome just to see what they expect.
Yeah, I mean,
so I guess
obviously you started it bang in the middle of a pandemic. So that's a good time. I mean, like it's not a good time in terms of what everyone was going through, but it's a good time because it gives you something to focus on. It gives people something to watch. And also there's a lot more people paying attention. So
certainly.
So it's pretty much an optimum time. Do you think that had it not been for the pandemic, it was something you were still going to do at some point?
Probably. I probably would have. Yeah, because I'd already had most of the film. Where I got a lot of my film early on was actually in Berlin. Safe Light Berlin is a major film photography shop in the city there. They're great. It's a great store, and I really like the people who work and run the place. And in any case, they would always have like a ridiculous amount of expired films. All these crazy film stocks that I'd never heard of, or just were only sold in Europe. And I think they'd sold them for about €5 a roll, which isn't that's pretty reasonable at this point, especially since most of these rolls, I don't think I've had a single roll from this shop that turned out bad pretty much. So I just had all these crazy rolls. I just bought a whole plethora of it. And so I already had kind of the groundwork there. I had the film. And so the easy part was shooting. And I should add, I forgot to mention it earlier, but another reason I like expired film, the shooting process of it, is it kind of acts as a B-roll in a way for me, especially if you have either a modular camera or if you have multiple cameras. Let's say I'm shooting somewhere. If I'm hiking, well, I would shoot with a fresh stock, something that I really don't want to mess up. And then there'll be obviously dozens of other opportunities along the way where I might see something that I'm not quite certain will turn out well, but I don't want to waste the opportunity, and I'll shoot that with expired film.
You see, I would feel like it was going to be the other way around though, because this is obviously ignorance on my part, but I would feel like you would be more precious over the expired film, and you'd almost be saving that for the best possible photos. The way you're describing is kind of the complete inverse of that, that's really interesting because I've got, like I said, I've got a couple boxes of Pro 400H. I've got an absolute ton of Cinestill, which I'm now worried about checking the expiry date on after what you said, because I've never really paid attention to that. And it's all in mind for specific projects where I'm very, very committed to it being used for an exact application, as opposed to just like, sod it, let's stick this in the camera this time. Whereas like what you're saying is like the opposite. If it was something that was like so hard to find, or maybe you'd never see again, I'd be terrified to use it for the wrong thing. So that's really interesting. It's a much different mindset.
I think for those type of film stocks, I would be more hesitant to use it for that though. But like, for the most part, you're going to find that a lot of the more, I wouldn't say consumer films, but the ones that you can find at a drugstore, you're going to find a lot more Kodak Gold and Fuji Superior, I don't know, and then just stocks like that, which are still being sold. You're going to find a lot more of those, and those are the ones I really just go crazy with, shooting anything and everything on the side. But if there's a stock, that I only have one of, then I'm definitely going to put it to better use than that. I know because like a lot of the cameras that I've gotten, most of them I've gotten locally. It's kind of just me wheeling and dealing, I guess, and slowly trading my way up to better cameras. And with that, you do come across a lot of old, Kodak Gold and such. So I got like, I don't know how many, like probably 100 rolls of that. And right. And that's how I would do it. The style of shooting is with those rolls of film.
Well, Kodak Gold's an interesting one because I really feel like Kodak should kind of figure it out that there's actually an opportunity to make some money at the moment. And if they made Kodak Gold in 120 or Color Plus in 120 or Ultramax in 120, they would just have such an enormous market from it. They seem to be almost allergic to earning money at the moment, but that's beside the point. So if I could ask your expert opinion here, for those of us that have never shot like a sort of more standard non-peel apart expired film, what ones are what films are more suited to being interesting or nice when they're expired?
Yeah, that's important to note because I think I wouldn't say expert by any means, but yeah, trial and error, lots of trial and error. In my case, black and white film is going to be your best bet, hands down. Black and white film, especially if you can develop black and white film. I just started within the past year developing black and white film, and it's easy once you get the necessary equipment. It's not that difficult, but it just ages better. You don't have to deal with color shifts and even increased grain. Really, sometimes it adds more to the images than fine grain film.
Right.
So black and white, I think you find it pretty plentiful too. You'll find all sorts plentiful, but black and white especially, I think you're going to find a lot more of it. I think the second most preferable would be color negative C41. And they do say the higher ISO films, they don't age as well. And that's definitely the case. So if you find let's say expired Verichrome, I'm trying to think or Verichrome's black and white. What's the color? What's Vericolor? That's like 125 ISO. Well, that's going to probably age a lot better than something that's like 800 ISO.
Right.
So lower ISO color negative film, you'll find more often than not, decent results with that. And then for me personally, I've had shit luck with old slide film, especially like Ektachrome 264. I bought quite a bit of that because that's also plentiful. And oh my gosh, like these photos, you can try everything in the book and they're just not salvageable a lot of times. the transparencies, they're just unbelievably fogged and really thin. So like they're very faint images and you can't do much to bring these faint images back. And then sometimes you just get these absolutely atrocious color, like magenta color casts that also just there's no ability to recover from this strong color shift. So I just stay away from expired slide film at this point. I don't even bother anymore because I've had so much bad experience with it.
Well, let's say right now I hold the ability to not only circumvent horrendous travel restrictions that are currently in place and all of the fear of actually moving around, things like that. Let's say I have the ability right now to pick you up where you are and drop you anywhere in the world and you get one roll of film. Where would you want to be dropped and what roll of film would you want?
Dang, that ain't the question. Okay. I would honestly say somewhere within the continental US because I still feel like there's a lot to see here. No, actually, I'm going to change it. I'd be dropped in the Dolomites in Italy.
Right.
Those looks amazing, especially since I'm a huge history buff. there's an area in the Dolomites where there was a battlefield in World War I. So it's this mixture of history and landscape that is just remarkable. You have trenches and barbed wire on the face of a 200-meter cliff.
Yeah.
And my film stock would be right now, I'd say Portra. I like Ektar a lot right now though too. But Portra because if you're shooting like that's a tough question. Yeah, I'd say Portra. Screw it. Because it's idiot proof, and I'm still an idiot, especially when you're talking like a sunset image, and you do have this crazy dynamic range, and you really have to be intentional with your exposures to try and find the proper exposure.
Well, Portra is a good safe answer. It's you're not going to get
I think
bad
160.
result.
I'll say 160 though. Actually, 160 is the little brother that sometimes gets forgotten. But
right.
I did a big trip to the Southwest, not a big trip, a little trip to the Southwest, like Zion National Park and stuff last year. All I had with me was Portra 160, and couldn't have asked for better images in my mind. I was really happy with what I got.
Have you ever actually significantly hated a film stock?
I used to hate Ektar because I probably wasn't exposing it properly, or just sometimes Ektar is a little more forgiving than other conditions. Or let's say I for some reason if I shoot Ektar at night, I'm not always going to be happy with the results because the blacks are just a little bit blacker. You get a little less shadow detail than Portra. But if I'm shooting in broad daylight of a landscape, then really Ektar is hard to beat.
Right.
Or sunset. Yeah.
It's something the first roll of Ektar I ever used, I photographed an incredibly ginger, freckled man, and it honestly looked like I was making fun of them. It made them look like a racist cartoon of an Irishman from the 1920s. It was not a good look at all. But if you're not including people, it can look fantastic.
Yeah, that's tricky, I'm sure, with Ektar and taking portraits. I've heard it handles skin tones pretty well, but gosh.
Well, I was told by previous podcast guests that Ektar is actually fantastic for darker skin tones. Mm-hmm. Because the saturation actually suits the sort of the luminosity mix, which is interesting. I haven't had the chance to try it yet, but I have to do that very soon. A massive thank you for you taking the time to do this. Seriously, it's I'm always blown away by the fact that people are willing to give up their time to talk to some fat loser in the middle of a crappy little island in the middle of the Atlantic. But it's very kind of you. But the most important thing, the whole sort of reason for the podcast, is that I just force people to like stuff that I like. So we need to tell people where they can go to see your YouTube stuff and to find you on Instagram. And we need to encourage you to hurry up and get a website going with some prints for sale so people like me can buy some prints. So where can people go to find you?
So on YouTube, my YouTube channel is called Expired Bren. My name's Brendan, so Bren's a little easier, especially since there's like 80 variations of Brandon's. I think in the UK, that's more the case in here. Anyhow, Expired Bren for YouTube, and Instagram also at Expired Bren.
Man, massive thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. It's been an absolute pleasure, Kris. You got me thinking about a lot of stuff, just a lot of interesting points, especially about this, photo manipulation. I find that point especially relevant.
I mean, it's literally the reason I picked up film last year. So in the middle of lockdown, I was like, I need to learn to develop film because it's one of those things that's always bugged me that I've never done. And having started doing it, the first thing that jumped out of me was that it streamlines your process quite significantly compared to digital, where you're doing a lot of manipulation in Photoshop. It's a lot of icing and not much cake, if that makes sense. Yeah. Whereas with film photography, I could kind of force a line to be drawn, and that was the state of the work. And then I knew that it was something that was ringing true with me in a way that I was happy with. It was meaning something to me because I instantly wanted to change my digital work to a more film-like process, in the sense of wanting it to be like the retouchings reined way back, the the consistency is done in a slightly different way in terms of like how you're treating raw files. So I think it's maybe I'm just the right kind of stupid that I figured this out and it worked for me. But I think it's a really overlooked quality of film photography is that there is a built-in subconscious honesty to it to people that don't know about photography.
Absolutely. I think also it's an interesting perspective, those who might not be so familiar with photography, but just like, it's almost like a pushback in way of just, especially Instagram, forms of social media as such, even though film photography also is a huge, Instagram plays a huge role in film photography. All the while it's just these filters and that, you know, people use on a constant basis. And a lot of these filters are in a way try to mimic, you know, what would be film photography. I think that's also something I thought about, is just why I like square format. Well, when I first really enjoyed taking photos with my iPhone, you know, 10, 11, 12 years ago.
Yep.
Instagram was only square photos. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's why I kind of liked sticking around to 6x6, is because Instagram used to be also, you know, square format.
Well, on the subject of you saying that a lot of it's kind of mimicry of the way film looks, the filters that people are adding. The fact is, today, I don't know of anyone that's trying to make film look like digital, but I know plenty of people that are trying to make digital look like film, including myself. So I think that answers the question on which one wins. It's just a matter of getting people to buy into the process, and then maybe we can rejuvenate it more than it currently is.
Well, shoot, that's a good way of putting it. That's a argument stopper there in my mind. It's very true. I think especially for like landscape photography, I used to really enjoy these very saturated HDR landscape photos that people would take digitally. But it's just, I don't know, since I've started shooting film, and especially the work that people do in landscape photography, and also with a lot of people who shoot like large format, you know, color slide film. Well, gosh, it's just, for me, that's just so much more enjoyable to see these type of landscapes than what you see, these HDR panoramas, rainbows, and lightning. I don't know, it's just a little more subtle. Yeah, a little
bit more honesty.
But no one's trying to, you know, no one on shooting film is trying to really mimic this look. Essentially, what I mean to say for landscape.
Yeah, it's a strange one. I feel like me and you are going to have another podcast again soon, and we'll be able to go much more into detail on some of this stuff, which will be a lot of fun. Again, man, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Kris. I had a great time. Absolutely. I love talking this stuff. So anytime.
of the paper. Don't run up in the morning, let it taper. Inhale and let it out like reservations. Exhale and breathe, I'm praying for some patience. Proceed, I think I'm high as a kite.